After the battle, Gron and Sarai could not agree what to do with the corpse of the raider they had just killed. Sarai wanted to dump the body outside the base and leave it to the infected, while Gron wanted to put it in a grave. Eventually, Sarai just gave up arguing. Unfortunately, it turned out that burying someone who had been bit without destroying the brain isn't exactly the best idea. Soon after, the corpse reanimated and crawled its way out of the grave, only to be put down again. This led to further arguments between Gron and Sarai, which at this point was just a regular occurrence. Being a bit fed up, Gron went for a walk where he spotted a coat which had obviously belonged to one of the dead. Not wanting to say no to a free coat, he gave it a quick wash and threw it on. To help ease the tensions, Paul suggested they built Sarai a little workshop. It made total sense really, as Sarai could use her engineer expertise to build them new equipment and research new ways to use the limited resources that they had. Plus, it kept her and Gron separate, preventing them from butting heads. A win-win really. Not long after the room was built, a transmission came over the radio.
This is an official Empire transmission from His Nobility, Lord Axush.
I need help. Any local settlement? Please, I'm being hunted by a monster. Please, anyone.
A friendly settlement? Well, it would be risky, but building a good rapport with neighbours who didn't want to kill them was something that all three decided was a good idea. So they sent a message saying they would shelter the noble until a shuttle arrived.
Well, I suppose this dirty little piss pot will suffice for now. Be warned, though, that the monster that hunted me is truly deadly, and I am certain it is not far behind.
It didn't take long for said monster to catch up with them.
There, that's it! Kill it! All of you, kill it! Well, kind people, I thank you for your service. Perhaps you are slightly above peasantry after all.
Rather die than see that noble again.
You know what? I actually agree with you.
See, you two can get along. After the noble left, they were finally able to finish the outer wall and make a little mine to get metal from. But that wasn't all they made. For an extra level of security, a 2-gate system was built with traps placed around the centre, creating a decent little kill box to stem the tide of zombies when they broke in. For the most part, this did its job well, but every now and again the flow would become too great and they would have to retreat and battle it out in the inner base. During one such overflow, they came across another new breed of zombie, the acid zombie. Immediately, it was clear that facing such a mutated zombie in close quarters was a fast track to extensive acid burns and scarring, so the three kept as much distance from it as possible. Despite this, it still died like all the rest. Afterwards, they intercepted their second transmission in only a few days. The medicine was something which they sorely needed, so it was agreed that Gron and Paul would leave while Sarai would lock herself in the base to tend to the crops and do her research.
Are you sure you'll be okay here? We'll only be gone for a few days.
Obviously, I can handle things here.
It turns out that Sarai could not handle things easily. Quickly, she realised that harvesting crops was nowhere near as easy as she assumed it would be, and unfortunately, she ended up destroying a lot of them in her attempts at harvest. Ironically, for a journey that took 1.2 days each way, Gron and Paul's trip to get the supplies was pretty uneventful, with the only threat they had to fight being squirrels, since apparently squirrels were extremely violent on this planet. When they returned to Lendo, they found the base being surrounded by a giant horde blocking access to the gate. So, they did what they saw as the only obvious choice. They fired a few shots to get the zombies' attention, then led them around the lake before bolting it inside the now free gate. What no one from Lendo knew, however, was that the kind trader from the Oara League that had given them the seeds had kept his word about investing in a future trading partner, and sent a caravan of traders to Lendo. This group arrived outside Lendo from the east, the base's outer wall blocking the view of the Horde, until it was far too late. It was a complete massacre. At the same time, the section of the Horde which had followed Ron and Paul had made it to the gate and quickly smashed it apart, before spilling the fight into the base itself. The arrival of the traders possibly ended up saving Sarai, Ron and Paul, as the Horde was naturally split between the two fights, and when the traders were overrun, they fled, leading a large segment of the zombies with them, leaving little for Lendo to mop up after several minutes of bitter fighting. Afterwards, they found several members of the trade caravan who had been left behind when they ran away, as they were too wounded to keep up. Ron and Paul did what they could to save them, but within an hour, they all had died and turned to zombies. Not wanting to waste what she saw as free gifts, Sarai raided the corpses of the traders, and took what food they had left behind before claiming one of their spears for herself, finally getting rid of her awful knife for a weapon with a little bit more range. They all heard the crash, and without even hesitating, Gron ran out to see what had happened. It was a heavily damaged escape pod, and within it was an unconscious young woman. Bringing her into the base, Gron got Paul to take a look at her, making use of Paul's first aid training. While the crash had knocked her out, most of her injuries did seem like they would heal in no time. Not that Lendo had time to wait around. Meanwhile, Sarai had been scavenging the corpses. She spotted 3 people off in the distance, all of them dressed the exact same as the raider from the other day. She barely had time to get inside and grab Gron and Paul before the raiders made it to the front gate. Once the raiders broke in, Sarai tried to lead them off to the side so that Paul and Gron could pick them off, but the plan failed immediately, as 2 of the raiders broke off to fight the gunman. Sarai found herself in a brutal spear match, one which she barely won by the skin of her teeth, when she managed to lodge her spear in her opponent's leg, incapacitating them. Stumbling away with severe injuries, she went to see how the others were doing, only to see Gron in the ground in the distance, and Paul wrestling with one of the raiders. She went over to help Paul, but was instantly hit across the head. Paul used this opening to smash his revolver across the raider's head, carving the man's skull in. Just as he got the chance to catch his breath, he looks up to see the 3rd raider running away. At this point, Paul fully believed that both Sarai and Grom were dead instead of just unconscious, so in a fit of rage, she followed the raider, shooting at him, one of his bullets catching the man in the ribs. Without even hesitating, Paul shot the man one final time, before returning to the base, to find that both Gron and Sarai were in fact alive. Gron had woken up while Paul was on his rampage, and barely managed to drag Sarai back to the room and bandage her up. But her wounds were bad, and she had suffered extreme blood loss. Paul and Gron were both in a bad state themselves, with each of them having numerous cuts, bruises, and other injuries. But compared to Sarai, these seemed laughable. These injuries weren't the last of their problems, however. The raider that had caused the injuries to Sarai, while being wounded, was still very much alive. They had locked them in a room which originally was going to be used for food production, but now had through necessity become a makeshift cell. A decision about what to do with the raider would soon have to be made.